call Nikki Kay.
Mr Speaker, I am delighted to speak on this legislation. I'm particularly delighted as a blue-green from Auckland. I think we need to remind ourselves of why we need this legislation. Mr Speaker, the reason that we need this legislation is because of the years of the 2000s whereby our environment was trashed. That's right. Under the last Labour government, under a red-green government, we had significant environmental degradation. And I just want to take us through some of those. In many areas, we have had to redress this. In the area of deforestation, New Zealand lost 30,000 hectares under Labour's years in office. We have turned this around in 2009 and 2010. In the area of renewable energy, there was more generation from coal, oil and gas in any time in our history under the last Labour government. Under this government, more than 32,000 gigawatt hours of electricity was produced from renewable sources in 2010. Ruth Dyson mentioned the ETS. The irony of the Labour Party mentioning the ETS is that under their watch, emissions significantly increased. The other massive irony of the Labour Party mentioning the ETS is that they constantly talk about our most disadvantaged. And, Mr Speaker, there is such hypocrisy in that, because under an ETS that Labour would have passed, that would have doubled the cost to low-income families. Mr Speaker, it's actually not a...
Point of order, the Honourable Steve Chadwick.
The member opposite used the word hypocrisy relating to some Labour policy. I take offence at that remark.
Yes, it's out of order to use that word. I'll ask the member to withdraw that comment.
Mr Speaker, I withdraw and apologise.
Nikki Kay.
Mr Speaker, this bill is about creating a national independent environmental regulator. This bill will provide finally a one-stop shop for environmental regulatory functions, consenting, monitoring and providing technical advice. Again, what this is about is providing a much more professional framework to how we manage our environment in New Zealand. That is sending a very clear message that we value our environment. In the area of the economy, for a very long time, we have had a very clear split with a professional framework, with Treasury as the policy advisor, the Reserve Bank with the regulatory functions, and the Auditor General as the auditor. By ensuring that the Ministry for the Environment can be a policy advisor, the EPA as a regulator, and the Parliamentary Commissioner as an auditor, we are showing that we really value our environment, because on this side of the House, we do understand that our environment and our economy are inextricably linked. And despite of the history of the Labour Party and their degradation and the trashing of the environment and the greenwash that comes from that side of the House, we have done many things under this government to show how much we value our environment. The benefit of this legislation is also in the area of efficiency. We are going to bring together regulations across government agencies, including the Ministry of Economic Development, IRMA, the Ministry of the Environment, all under one roof. The merging of this technical and regulatory skills will severely reduce inefficiency and lead to much more robust and informed decision-making. There are benefits as well in the area of national consenting. And an area, the opposition constantly raise issues of certain consents, but one area whereby the EPA will really help, for instance, is the area of renewable energy. We know this because there is an application currently before the EPA for Contact Energy's 1 billion Tahara geothermal station near Taupo. I want to acknowledge the support of certain environmental groups of this legislation because there's a very good quote actually from Gary Taylor from EDS, and what he has said is the EPA is to become the national environmental regulator, and that is vital. It is vital that it is free from political influence. We are pleased to see the continuing evolution of the EPA as a national, independent environmental regulator. Finally, I just want to touch on the issue of political neutrality, which has been raised by many opposition members, and actually just remind ourselves what is actually in the legislation regarding this. This is an independent Crown entity. It will be free from political influence, and that is really important. It is really important that we finally have a much more professional framework for our environmental issues, because this country values our environment too much to enable what happened in the, as I refer to them, the noughties under the last Labor government. We value our environment too much to enable that to happen again. That is why this is part of a significant amount of reform that our government have done to ensure that we can properly get good information about what is happening in our environment, that we can properly manage things like our consents to ensure that big renewable energy projects are happening. Mr Speaker, this is an important piece of legislation not just for current New Zealanders but also for future New Zealanders that will come after us. This legislation is part of our blue-green approach which will enable environmental issues to be considered in a much more professional, independent, accountable and transparent way. In passing this legislation, we are sending a clear message to New Zealanders that this government highly values our environmental.
I call Phil Twyford.
Well, there goes the next generation of the Blue-Greens. My advice, Nikki Kay, is that if you want to burnish your credentials, Nikki Kay, in Auckland Central with